What's up, everybody? I'm Jason, and welcome back to the vlog. So this will be the last vlog for 2021, and I'm recording this on the 21st or the 17th of December 2021. So for all of you who are subscribed over the last couple of months while I've been doing the EOS R5 project, I'd like to thank you briefly for your support, for your subscription, for you joining the train wreck or train ride, depending on which way you want to look at it. I also want to wish all of you who are watching this, my subscribers, a happy holidays and a happy new year, because I will not be back until after the first of the year. So there you go. Happy holidays, happy new year. I don't have a tremendous amount to wrap up this year, but I do have a couple of things that I want to talk about, so I will try to be pretty brief. First of all, I have received a few scattered reports. My attention has been brought to this by one of my viewers that there is some murmuring. I don't know what a good word for it is, and it's actually quite hard to diagnose just what the extent of the problem is, or if there is a problem, or if it's just a isolated situation for specific users. But anyway, that there may be some issues with the Canon R5 1.5 firmware, specifically the suppress low frame rates setting in the smooth viewfinder update performance. And what some people are reporting, so there is a thread over on Canon Rumors about this, and there was somebody on Facebook posting about this, but what very few, it seems, people are reporting is that when the camera is set to smooth and the suppress low frame rate setting is enabled, that the autofocus reliability decreases significantly. Now, Canon does warn about this in the manual. They do say that autofocus performance may degrade significantly when the suppress low frame rates mode is on. So this is something to be aware of. They also are saying, some of these individuals, now it looks like this is where, like I said, it's hard to talk about like extent or widespreadness. The thread on Canon Rumors, in my reading, in my recollection, because I didn't take detailed notes, there was one, maybe two people saying that they had the problem, and there were several other people saying that they weren't seeing the problem and that things were actually better for them on 1.5 firmware than on the 1.4 firmware. So AF performance was actually improved. So to compound on all of this as well, what the two discussions that I have seen are saying, and this may just be one user posting in two places under different pseudonyms or whatever, I'm not entirely sure. But the one thing that I have seen is that they are saying that when you turn off the suppress low frame rate setting in the display performance menu, that doesn't actually disable it on their camera or for them, and they still continue to have problems. And that's this is what's being what I have seen. Now I'm actually hesitant to even bring this up and talk about it, because I couldn't reproduce it on my camera when I tried. Now, I didn't do a ton of extensive testing. I didn't do a ton of low light testing. I flipped it on, tried focusing, seemed like it worked, turned it off, seems like it still works after I turned it off. So there's a lot of potential variability here. So it may only crop up if you're shooting in very low light with the smooth setting on and the suppressed low frame rate performance, etc. Because, like I said, this is, as I've said many of my R5 videos, as you add more complexity, there's new and interesting ways for things to break. Now, as I said, I haven't seen this problem personally on my camera or the other R5 that I have access to since the upgrade. Now, neither of us use smooth display performance. We used power saving because saving power is more important to us than a viewfinder that's imperceptibly smoother. So that could be a factor. It could be something that requires shooting in very low light conditions so that the viewfinder is, or relatively low light conditions so that the viewfinder is, or the camera is doing this low frame rate suppression thing. And as a side effect of that, it's not getting the focus information, or it doesn't have the time to do the focus information, or something like that. It could also be potentially some other interaction with some other setting on the camera. Now, as I said, my cameras seem to work fine. I haven't found or noticed an issue on my camera. That said, in addition to what the handful, if that, of posters that have said that they have seen this problem have said, they have put up a workaround that that they've used to essentially disable the setting, because what they're saying is it doesn't go away for them when they turn off the setting in their camera. And what they're saying essentially is turn it off in the menu, back up the settings to your card, which might not be a bad idea to do anyway. Reset the camera, use the reset basic settings to reset the camera to essentially factory defaults, and then reload the settings from your card, and then that will reset the smooth performance. And after they did that, they said they saw the performance improve, or the problem go away. So that's I guess you could say, news. Like I said, I'm kind of hesitant to really even talk about it an awful lot, considering that at the moment, I'm not seeing a widespread, everybody is, massive complaints about this. In fact, the thread on Canon rumors was 4 pages long, which started on the 3rd. And if you think about, okay, yes, sure, that's the holidays, the traffic might be down, people might not be posting, but 4 pages is not a tremendously long thread for more than 2 weeks if there's a significant problem that is widespread and that many people are having. As always, though, when it comes to firmware updates, my recommendation is not to jump on it on day one. Canon, Sony, Nikon, all of these companies, they do definitely try to ensure that they're putting out bug-free firmware. That's obviously something that they're always trying to do. However, the reality is that as these cameras get more complicated and you have more and more interactions and more potential places for problems, firmwares just get more and more complicated. Bugs are entirely possible. So my recommendation always is, even if the new firmware has some feature that you really, really want, give it a couple weeks and wait and see what happens. If it's not being pulled and replaced by Canon, then, and that's the case here, Canon has not pulled the firmwares. They have done that in the past if there's widespread reports of showstopper bugs. But if within a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, they haven't pulled the firmwares, they're not issuing a point release update for the firmware, then it's probably safe to apply then. But as with anything, being an early adopter, you obviously are also the person who's most at risk to discover potentially significant bugs. On that same note, because this is something that I've seen come up repeatedly in these discussions, it seems to me like a lot of photographers don't really understand how to report things, problems, bug analysis, or bug reports to a company like Canon. So obviously you're going to have to call support, and you're going to have an interaction with their support people. If you're a CPS member, then you probably will want to go to CPS support, because that will get you a direct link to people who are going to be dealing with professionals. If you're not a CPS member, then you're going to have to go to regular support. In any event, what you want to do is, before you even call and talk to Canon, you're going to want to gather as much information as you can on what your camera is doing and how you have it set up. And this is another place where the ability to save camera settings is actually really useful, because that's a file, that's something that you could export from your camera, copy it off this compact flash or SD Express, CF Express card, put it in an email and potentially send that to Canon and say, this is how my camera is set up. When I changed this setting from this to this is what caused the problem. Because regardless of whether you're having a problem, and this applies to beyond cameras, this applies to computers, this applies to websites, software, anything that involves computers. In fact, anything that involves anything, like cars even. Regardless of whether what you're having or the problem you're having, if the people who are trying to, or tasked to fix it, so the engineers in Canon who are writing the firmware or fixing the firmware, your mechanic, the software developers that are working on a website, or for Microsoft, for Windows, or for Mac OS, or whatever, if they can't reproduce the problem, they can't fix the problem. And I know, like, this should be pretty obvious and pretty straightforward, but that this is something I think a lot of people seem to forget. If you can't provide the steps that you took in the configuration of your camera, and the steps that you took and the conditions you were shooting under, because again, low frame rate suppression is going to be something that, and obviously I haven't taken the software apart. I have no idea how it actually is working. But low frame rate suppression could be something that's always running, or it could be something that only kicks in when the camera detects that it's entering a light level regime where it has to reduce the frame rate to provide time for all of the other system operations to run. So you have to think, I've talked about this before with like mirrorless cameras, but you have to think everything has to fit into a time slot. So there's a time slot that the camera has before it needs to capture the next frame to display for the viewfinder. And in that time slot, it has to be able to do the autofocus operations. I would say metering, but in theory, it should be able to do that from the data that it's using for the viewfinder. So all of this stuff has to happen. And how that software internally is working is, that's kind of an open, I don't want to say open discussion, open debate, whatever. It's an open question. That's the word I'm looking for. So it could be that it's always running with tighter timings, and it just doesn't matter as much when you start talking about higher brightness levels, because the exposure that's needed to be captured to show you the viewfinder image is shorter. Or it could be that it only starts reducing or tightening the timings when the camera is in low light, in which case there's going to be different regimes. So that's going to be an important information to convey. So does this happen if you're shooting outside in the midday? Does this happen only when you're shooting inside in low light? What aperture settings, what were the exposure settings when this problem was occurring? So you need to make a note of that. You also, like I said, need to make note of what your camera settings are and what you did to try to get there. And I would say even before you start now, given the fact on the R5 at least, I don't remember if this is available on the R6, but on the R5 at least, because you can export your settings, I would even go so far as to say one of the first things you should do is export your settings, save them to your card, reset the camera, reload your settings, try again, and see if you can reproduce the problem. Because one of the other things that comes up is anytime you're talking about software or whatever, that there's always the possibility that something in your specific camera didn't get flipped over correctly, or didn't get updated correctly, or is being read incorrectly. And saving out the settings, resetting the camera, and resaving the settings may overwrite some variable someplace, somewhere in memory that's not entirely, or something somewhere in memory that's completely unrelated to the specific instance that you're dealing with or talking about, or that's causing you a problem. And then all of a sudden everything starts working again because whatever didn't move or didn't get updated or didn't do its thing suddenly is now in the right configuration, in the right option, or the right setting. So, like I said, when you're reporting something that, you know, what you did, what settings you have set, and this, again, like I said, is a great thing that we can save settings files, because that's something that could be provided to support to say, this is how my camera was set up and this is what you know, I changed. So you tell them what you were trying to do, what you changed, what you expected the camera to do, and what you saw the camera actually do. And so, for example, I filed a bug report back when I first got my R5 about the retract lens on power off function, that it was setting all lenses to infinity instead of the just the extending lenses. And, you know, basically I said, this is what I tested it with, and listed all the lenses that I tested it with. This is what the manual says it should do. This is what I expected it to do. And this is what it does on DSLRs. This is what it's not doing on my R5. Now, Canon hasn't seen fit to fix that. It's been a bug in the cameras since apparently the EOS R was first released. I have no idea why, you know, they either aren't changing the manual to reflect what it actually does, which in some respects is a perfectly valid way to address the situation. It might not be ideal, but it would at least explain what's going on, or fix the actual flaw in the code that's causing it to set all lenses to infinity focus and not just the extending ones. So then, like I said, then you go open your ticket, you talk to support, you provide all of the information that you can, because, as I said, eventually somebody at the company, an engineer, a support technician, has to be able to reproduce the problem for them to be able to even begin to figure out what it is. Now, as far as going and talking about this online on YouTube as a video like this, or on a discussion forum or whatever, like, that's perfectly reasonable. In fact, it can be useful because as a first step for your own troubleshooting, because if you post something and say, hey, I'm having this problem, and everybody says, no, not happening here, that's a good indication that it might be something specific to you, as opposed to a bug in the firmware or a system-wide issue. So if you're not, then, but as I said, if you come back and you see that this is being, you know, talked about, or there's a problem, or there's an active, significant discussion about a problem that you're having, chiming in on Facebook or chiming in on a discussion forum or posting a video on YouTube isn't helping. I mean, it helps spread the word, it helps provide information to other people, but ultimately, people have to raise tickets. People have to raise support event requests with the developer, with the manufacturer, for things to get fixed. So if the extent of what you've done is bitched about it on a post on Facebook, and you're not actively in turn following that up with a support ticket with the manufacturer, with Canon in this case, or whoever it is, then you're not actually solving or helping to solve the problem. You're just making more noise. And the final thing that I wanted to talk about, and I should probably edit something in at the beginning of this video, that this video has been a little different from my previous videos, as that you're not looking at me, you're actually looking at footage that I have been shooting with my 100-500. So I've had about a week now of playing with the 100-500. I haven't actually gotten out and shot an awful lot in the way of stills. I have been playing with shooting video using the Super 35 or the APS-C crop mode on my R5 in 4K with the teleconverter on the 500 at 500, so the equivalent of almost 1,200 millimeters of focal length, effective. And so I gotta be honest, so far I'm pretty impressed with the lens optically. I'm very impressed with the lens weight-wise. All things and told, I'm happy with the lens. Am I like super excited about anything or everything. Well, no, I just don't really get that excited with lenses anymore. I do have to say, there are some things that the more I've used it, I've gotten better at dealing with, but I just don't particularly, I'm still not liking the situation. So the first of those is definitely the teleconverter situation. I do not like having to have the lens extended to 300 millimeters or longer to put the teleconverter on. It is making it very hard and awkward to put a teleconverter on the lens. Now, the pro is that I probably won't need to put a teleconverter on the lens an awful lot or as much. And 700 millimeters, 700 and change millimeters, what you would be shooting 500 with a teleconverter is wicked hard in my experience to shoot effectively. The longer the focal length, the harder things get, and this is doubly true with modern high-resolution cameras, where they demand all the performance in the world and all the technique in the world if you want to get sharp, pixel-sharp images. And there's very much, I'm finding, there's very much a, well, you could call it a coffin corner of exposure settings for shooting with modern cameras, where if you want really, really sharp images, you need higher and higher shutter speeds, even if you have image stabilization available. Even with image stabilization enabled, you need higher and higher shutter speeds, because subject motion, like everything and anything, atmospheric distortion becomes a significant problem. And so everything compounds on how how good your technique and how good your tripod and tripod head and the rigidity of your setup is. And that's something I've certainly found to be the case shooting video with of course, video imposes even its own significant challenges compared to shooting stills. So shooting stills, you don't have to worry so much about the rigidity of the camera lens mount. I mean, it's good to have a good rigid mount, but the reality is that because you're shooting for fractions of a second generally, and it's a still, you don't see shake and whatever you want to call it, shake, flex in the mount over time. Whereas when you're shooting video, the shake in the mount is, actually significant. And in fact, it's kind of amusing. So I was doing some videography of the moon, again, 1200 millimeter equivalent, so 1200 f10, which is kind of nuts when you think about it, or when I think about it. But on a Gitzo GT 3530 LS tripod, so not exactly the lightest tripod in the world, and me walking on the ground, I was on a concrete deck, me walking on the ground within 5 or 6 feet of the camera translated to shake you could see in the video, in the image. And that's how much magnification, how much sensitivity is going on when you start talking about this stuff. And you have to be aware, you have to be prepared for that. Now, I could have a more rigid solution. There's a lot of things that I could do to make the setup more rigid that I'm definitely looking into. Going so far, even, I'm actually looking at potentially switching or moving to, if I'm going to continue to shoot video on this kind of mount, I'm going to potentially end up putting it on carbon fiber cinema rails, so that the camera, the tripod, or the camera and the lens are locked together on the same kind of rigid setup that's used for cinematography. And then that is mounted directly to the Manfrotto plate that is in my fluid head, so that I get as much rigidity as I possibly can to mitigate as much shake as or vibration as I possibly can. Because there is a part of me that goes, this is kind of cool shooting at like almost 1200 millimeters, and what kind of crazy things can I do with this besides just shooting, as you've seen video of the moon, especially gets handy when you start talking about shooting video of birds or wildlife, that you don't have to get as well. In some places you can't get close. So the American kestrel that's been up on the screen as video is an example of this. This is a bird that's a property over on the top of a 50, 60 foot high palm tree, if that, if not higher. And they're not really big birds to start with. I think they're only 8 or 9 inches tall, the overall. And I can almost fill the frame, or I can get very close to filling the frame, especially if I downsample, or I should say if I crop the 4K video down to 1080p, which, yes, I'm giving up even more resolution, but then we get into the whole how much resolution do you actually need debate. And I'm not convinced, I still shoot all these videos in 1080p. I'm not convinced that 4K is necessary for everything. But at any rate, so I've had time to play with the lens. I'm getting better at putting the lens, the teleconverter on, even though, putting a teleconverter on a lens, this is why I really like integral teleconverters. There's a lot of reasons I like integral teleconverters. Better image quality and flip of a switch activation. Putting a teleconverter on a lens is always kind of you need 3 hands operation. On the 100 to 500, it really is a 3 or 4 handed operation, especially when you consider how sort of sticky the RF mount lens caps can be, that they just don't want to come off things. And so it's not quite as smooth and seamless at least for me, it's not as smooth and seamless as it was putting the teleconverter on my 100 to 400 Mark II. Plus, with the 100 to 400 Mark II, because you could do it when the lens was completely retracted, it was possible to set the lens face down, put the teleconverter on it, lock the teleconverter in place, and then put all of it on your camera. I don't have a great tip on this. I've tried putting the teleconverter on the camera, then putting the lens on the teleconverter on the camera. I know that's not the recommended way to do it, but it at least it makes things easy to put, and then I don't have to worry about dust getting into the camera while I'm futzing with the lens because it's sealed up by the teleconverter. I've also done, obviously if you have the lens on a tripod, then it's pretty straightforward actually. In that cases, it's almost super easy, but that's always the case. But if you're hand holding it, it's a lot more tricky. Again, especially since you've got to be able to hold the lens to put the teleconverter on it. So that's still a point of contention. Of course, I haven't had the field time with the lens yet to know how often I'm actually going to need to use the teleconverter or want to use the teleconverter. It may just be something that I use for video stuff, and I shoot some crazy video with it and then go back to shooting full frame stills without it. I don't know yet. Also, again, subject matter. So the only thing I have really accessible to me right now are birds. Birds aren't tremendously big. They don't like to be I can't get super close. So that becomes a consideration or a factor. Whereas bigger game, moose, bear, buffalo, etc., they're big, and even though you're not going to get maybe as close, a buffalo at 25 yards is still pretty big compared to a little bird at 25 yards. So I'm going to wrap this up here. As I said, to all the subscribers, to all my viewers out there, happy holidays, happy new year. I'll see you next year. So, the usual stuff applies. If this was interesting or useful for you, please hit that like button. Let me know. If this kind of thing seems interesting, of course, I'm going to be continuing the R5 video project into, or tips and tricks project into next year. So if that kind of thing sounds interesting to you, please consider subscribing. And, this isn't so much a share it with people thing, but, obviously if somebody, could find this useful themselves, please consider sharing this video with them as well. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.